My name is Rachel Evans, and I'm 41 years old. It's a gray Monday morning, and I'm sitting in my usual corner of the open-floor office at Lexford Dynamics, cradling a lukewarm mug that says Queen of Syntax. The handle is chipped, the coffee is weak, and something in the air feels off. There's a nervous energy drifting across the translation floor. Papers shuffle more than usual, keys click with just a little too much pressure, and glances flick to the elevator every time it dings. It's like we're all waiting for a storm that hasn't hit yet, but we know it's coming. So before you listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's ease into the story together. 3 weeks earlier, the company announced we were getting a new CEO. And if you've ever worked at a legacy corporation like Lexford, you know what that means: restructuring, vision realignment, and a whole lot of polished nonsense that ends with people like me cleaning out their desks. Still, I tried not to panic. I'd survived 3 CEOs, 2 mergers, and a pandemic. I was, if nothing else, durable. Then Brandon Wolf stepped through our glass doors. 15 minutes late to his own welcome meeting, reeking of designer cologne and something murkier, vodka, maybe, or arrogance. His smile was tight and his handshake tighter. He didn't sit through introductions, just nodded like he was already bored. When he finally did speak, it was with phrases like synergize vertical global outcomes. It sounded like he'd swallowed a TED Talk. Day 2, he tried reorganizing the International Accounts Division, except he called our South Korea liaison the Singapore guy, in front of the whole department. I winced. Everyone did. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the attitude. Brandon didn't ask questions. He made declarations. Swift, clumsy decisions like someone speed-running a business sim they didn't understand. And through it all, he never once looked at me. I've been at Lexford for 17 years. My role? Officially, I'm a senior translation analyst. Unofficially, I'm the bridge between Lexford and its global partners. I speak 5 languages fluently and understand the delicate art of nuance better than most people understand office politics. I've coached VPs on tone, rescued contracts from cultural missteps, and helped seal deals worth millions. And yet, Brandon ignored me, never invited me to meetings with foreign clients, never asked for insights. At one leadership roundtable, he cut off my update mid-sentence to ask marketing about the font on our brochures. Font. I should have seen it coming. His clipped responses, his obsession with streamlining, his total lack of cultural curiosity. It all pointed toward a familiar kind of executive, the spreadsheet soldier, the kind who thinks trust can be outsourced and diplomacy can be automated, the kind who confuses accessibility with replaceability. And then came Sienna Hart. She arrived on a Wednesday, red heels clicking like a metronome of bad intentions. Her lipstick was loud, her smile louder, and her badge non-existent. HR introduced her with forced cheer. She's our new SEO specialist, helping out marketing. She took Rebecca's old seat, Rebecca, who'd quit 2 weeks ago after burning out under Brandon's relentless visibility campaigns. I missed Rebecca's quiet focus. What I got instead was Sienna's speakerphone calls about oat milk lattes and crushing brand engagement. By 9, she was commenting on my screen. You don't use Grammarly, huh? Brave. I smiled without turning. I've been writing in 5 languages since before Grammarly existed. Oh, right, she said, but AI's getting pretty good. Then came the jab that really set the tone. As we gathered for our weekly strategy session, Sienna walked in behind me and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, this must be the lifetime employee corner." Some people laughed. I didn't. "Good morning, Sienna," I said evenly, without warmth. She blinked, grinned, just teasing. Then sat too close, leaned in like we were girlfriends. "What are you working on?" she whispered. "Executive summary," I replied, in Japanese. Her eyes flicked to my screen. Google Translate must love you. And there it was, the sentence that told me everything I needed to know about how she and Brandon saw my work. Not as essential, not as expertise, but as outdated. Disposable. I said nothing because I knew if I opened my mouth, I wouldn't be able to keep it professional. She leaned closer. We're all friends here, right? Her fingers brushed my arm. Too long, too intentional. And in that moment, I didn't feel flustered. I felt furious. Not because she was rude or arrogant or disrespectful, but because I knew this game. I'd seen it before. I just didn't know why I'd been picked to play it again. And then the meeting began, without Brandon, as usual. We waited, sipping weak coffee under flickering fluorescent lights. When he finally arrived, he dropped a manila folder onto the table like a mic. "We've got to cut deeper," he announced. Silence. "If we want to protect the international rollout, we need to trim non-core roles." Non-core. That word landed like a stone in my gut. Sienna raised her hand. "I've reviewed the digital operations list. We could start with localization. Brandon interrupted. "Yeah, I've been thinking the same. Look, I don't need regular translators in the company. Google Translate isn't perfect, but we're not exactly translating Shakespeare here." I stared at him. At Sienna. At the intern, who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. They weren't just cutting my job. They were cutting out everything it stood for. Relationship building, cultural context, trust. But I didn't flinch. I closed my tablet, stood. "I understand," I said, voice steady. Brandon blinked. Maybe he expected tears, a breakdown, a final dramatic protest. But I just walked out. For a moment. I didn't get far. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was 17 years of corporate survival kicking in. But as the elevator doors slid open, something inside me said, "No, not yet." I turned around. The hallway felt like static, like the building itself was holding its breath. I walked back into the conference room like I had every right to be there, which I did, and stood just behind Brandon's chair. He was already moving on, talking about consolidating the Asia-Pacific budget. Sienna was scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just dismembered an entire career. The rest of the room avoided looking at me like I was radioactive. "Wait," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the buzz. Brandon looked up, annoyed. "You need to understand something," I said. "You can't just replace a relationship with a software." He leaned back, eyes lazy. "Rachel, I appreciate your passion." I held up a hand. "No, you don't. If you did, you wouldn't have made this decision without asking what my clients actually need." He shrugged, smirked. "They'll adjust." I nodded slowly. "Will they? Do you know what Chirotech's lead negotiator said the first time we met? That my use of honorifics told him Lexford saw them as equals. That my understanding of indirect refusals meant we earned their trust. That's what you're cutting." Sienna chimed in, tone sugary. "It's not personal, Rachel. It's just strategy." I turned to her. "No, it's ignorance dressed up as innovation." Brandon chuckled. "You're not irreplaceable." I smiled faintly. "I'm not saying I am. I'm saying you're removing the only person who knows how our global partners think, who understands why tone matters, who's been in the room when no doesn't mean no, it means you haven't earned a yes yet." Silence. I could have said more. I could have pulled up emails, showed testimonials, named deals that would never have closed without me. But I realized something else in that moment, something colder. You can't explain fluency to people who only speak in buzzwords. So I straightened my spine, looked Brandon square in the eye, and walked out again, this time for real. The moment the doors closed behind me, the silence was deafening. No Slack pings, no Outlook alerts, no half-translated emails in 5 time zones demanding immediate attention, just me, and a hallway that had never felt longer. At home that evening, I sat on the couch for hours. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't pour wine, just sat, arms crossed, as if I could physically hold the years in. 17 years, gone with one manila folder and a half-smirked dismissal. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to email someone, HR, Brandon, anyone, to make them understand. But the truth? The louder voice in me didn't want to give them the satisfaction. The next day I waited. Not for an apology, but for confirmation. It came from Jenna Clark, my closest friend in the department. She messaged me mid-morning. "It's awkward here. People are whispering. Then, Thomas is in the meeting, Alice too. They're expecting you to interpret. My stomach dropped. I typed back. They fired me. Who's translating? They just assumed someone else could. My fingers clenched. Another message popped up. Brandon is trying to run it himself. Then, after a long pause, he's using an app. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. I could see it now, Brandon, phone in hand, holding it up like a shield, clicking play on some robotic Japanese translation that stripped every clause of its cultural cues. Takashi Sato would say nothing. Naoko Ishikawa would smile politely, but I knew what that silence would mean. Not confusion, not frustration, but insult. And in Japan, insult doesn't end in confrontation, it ends in disconnection. They wouldn't yell, they'd disappear. I asked Jenna, did they sign anything? Long pause. Not yet. Thomas hasn't spoken much. Just 4 words through Alice. We will discuss later. I sat up straighter. Not now, later. Which meant not with you. I knew Brandon wouldn't catch that. But I did. I checked my phone obsessively all day. No calls, no panicked emails begging me to come back. Just the dull throb of being invisible. At 4:06 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. Jenna. Can I call? Seconds later, we were on the line. I don't even know what to say, she whispered. I didn't say hello, I just asked, what happened? She sighed. Technically, everything went fine. I didn't buy it. Fine? Thomas didn't leave. Alice didn't object. They signed, even the expansion clause. I felt something inside me deflate. Not because I wanted the deal to fail, but because I wanted them to need me. You okay? Jenna asked. I will be, I said. But I wasn't. Because even if Lexford had scraped by this time, I knew something they didn't. They were building on a fault line. And when it cracked, when trust thinned and nuance disappeared, there'd be no one left to translate what went wrong. 3 days later, it happened. I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone buzzed again. Jenna. Urgent, her text read. Japanese summary, not accurate. I sat straight up. Not accurate? I replied instantly. Which one? Seconds later, she called. It's the executive summary, she said, her voice tight. The one they submitted after the strategy sync. The Japanese version. It's wrong. I felt my throat go dry. How wrong? Multiple clause discrepancies. Profit-sharing terms were reversed. Oversight conditions got flipped. The soft conditional language you always use? Gone. It reads like a direct order now. I closed my eyes. That wasn't just a translation error. That was a cultural breach. In Japan, phrasing a request as a demand doesn't just read as rude. It can read as hostile. Jenna kept going. Legal's tearing through both versions. HR locked down the project folders. Brandon's panicking. What about Sienna? She's saying she only used the tools she was told to. AI-assisted translation. I said nothing, just listened to my own heart pounding. He's trying to reach Chirotech, she added. He's already sent 2 meeting requests to their liaison team. I scoffed. Good luck with that. They're not responding, she said. He even tried calling Naoko directly. Did she answer? Jenna's voice dropped. She did, but she didn't say much. Just that the temperature in the room shifted. I knew what that meant. In Japan, silence doesn't mean confusion. It means disappointment. It means judgment. They're not angry, Jenna said. They're insulted. Of course they were. They trusted us, and Brandon treated that trust like a plug-in. You can't build rapport through a screen. You can't establish credibility with autofill sentences. These were people I'd spent years learning how to read. Not just their words, but their pauses, their sidesteps, their silences. Now all of that, gone, replaced with a PDF full of linguistic landmines. I rubbed my temples. They'll cancel, not today, not tomorrow, but quietly, they'll just vanish. Jenna didn't argue. I think so too, she whispered. There was a long pause on the line. In that stillness, I realized something else. something Brandon hadn't figured out yet. It wasn't about the contract. It was about the message behind the contract. They told our partners I wasn't necessary. They showed them what I'd built over 17 years was disposable. And that's when the last call came. Friday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer at first. It rang again. Then a voicemail dropped. Hi, this is Jordan from Lexford Dynamics Executive Office. I'm calling on behalf of the leadership team. They've asked me to reach out to you directly. I sat with the phone in my lap. He continued, We believe you've heard what happened. We'd like to formally invite you to return. Your previous capacity, or potentially something higher, depending on your interest. The company deeply regrets. I deleted the message. Then, moments later, I got an email. Same message, same offer. Return. I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box for nearly an hour. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to walk back in, head held high, and make them see what they almost lost. But a stronger part of me knew better. I didn't want to be rescued. I wanted to be respected. So I replied, Thank you for the offer. Before we proceed, I have 3 conditions. I listed them one by one. First, a public apology. Not a line in a company memo. A spoken, on-record acknowledgement from Sienna. Not just for undercutting me, but for diminishing the entire concept of human expertise. Second, financial compensation. Not a performance bonus. Not relocation support. Real damages. For wrongful termination and reputational harm. For the deals I helped secure. For the years they pretended I didn't matter. And third, total clarity of purpose. If I returned, I wouldn't come back as a translator. I would come back as a cultural strategist with full autonomy and a seat at the table. They didn't respond right away. But when they did, it was frantic. Another call, another request to meet in person. And something inside me said, Go, one last time. Not for them, for me. Friday morning, the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor of Lexford Dynamics. I stepped out slowly, heels echoing across the polished tile like punctuation. They'd asked me to come in, insisted actually. Said they wanted to rebuild the bridge and begin anew. I didn't wear black to be dramatic. I wore it for clarity. No frills, no softness. Just a clean slate of truth. The executive conference room was already full when I entered. Brandon Wolf stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. Sienna sat to his right, looking uncharacteristically small in a beige blazer and nude lipstick. Jenna was there too, off to the side, silent but steady. I walked to the center of the room, looked directly at Sienna. She stood slowly, voice tight. Rachel, I owe you a very public apology. The room hushed. She swallowed, then began. I spoke out of turn. I undermined your work. I dismissed your expertise and said deeply disrespectful things that reflected ignorance and arrogance. I was wrong. I didn't nod. I didn't offer a reassuring smile. I let the words hang. Because they weren't forgiveness words. They were liability words. She continued. I believed technology could replace people. I thought speed was more important than understanding. And because of that, I cost this company something invaluable. When she finished, she looked at me, not pleading, but exposed. I waited a beat, then turned slightly to the rest of the room. You didn't see me, I said. I was here for years, helping you close deals, navigate cultures, avoid offense. But I was invisible until I wasn't. You saw my value only after you lost it. A few execs shifted in their seats. And now, I said evenly, you want to recover your reputation on my back. I shook my head once. I'm not your symbol. I'm not your rescue plan. I'm a professional who deserved respect before it cost you millions. Brandon opened his mouth, probably to say something polished and PR safe. But I beat him to it. And just so you know, I said, voice steady, I've accepted another offer. Sienna blinked. Brandon's eyebrows twitched. He asked, the Japanese partners? I gave him a slow, knowing smile. They called me the day after they pulled out. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was shattered. That night, I stood on the balcony of my new office. Downtown skyline stretched out like a glittering path. The air was quiet, but not still. It was alive. So was I. This time, I wasn't just the translator. I was the voice. And they would never forget it. I didn't look back after I walked out of Lexford for the last time. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need to. I had already lived my proof. Every deal I'd saved, every subtle cue I'd caught, every syllable I'd shaped. It wasn't just work, it was presence, it was trust, it was translation in the truest sense. When I launched my own firm, I didn't just get a new title, I built a team, carefully, intentionally. Not just bilinguals, but bridge builders. Not just translators, but listeners. I hired women who had been told they were too soft-spoken, experts who'd been labeled niche, cultural consultants who had been overlooked because they didn't have the loudest voice in the room, but they had the most resonant. Together, we created a space where fluency wasn't just about grammar. It was about respect. And slowly, quietly, our reputation began to grow. Sometimes people from Lexford reach out. Carefully, cautiously. Some apologize, some are curious, some just want to know how we did it. Do you miss it? One asked me recently. I didn't even pause, not even a little. Because losing that job didn't break me. It revealed me. A few weeks passed, and I started to settle into my new rhythm. No more 7 a.m. check-ins or midnight fire drills. Just strategy sessions filled with curiosity and insight. Clients who asked questions before they made assumptions, and a team that didn't need convincing that empathy mattered. But that chapter with Lexford wasn't entirely closed yet. It wasn't about bitterness. It was about closure and clarity. So when Jenna called one crisp Tuesday morning and said, "You're going to want to hear this," I braced myself. "What now?" I asked. "They're spiraling." I leaned back into my chair. "Be specific." "The deal's officially dead. Chirotech sent a formal notice this morning through legal." I froze. "What did it say?" She took a breath. "I'll read it to you." Her voice shifted, slow and deliberate, as if each word weighed something. "After internal review and consultation with stakeholders, we believe the recent handling of sensitive communications and contractual documentation, without our input, demonstrates a disregard for precision, transparency, and mutual respect. We can no longer proceed with a partner unwilling to prioritize diligence and integrity." The words landed like iron. Then, softer, Jenna added, "They named her." I blinked. "Sienna?" She confirmed it with a whisper. They specifically called out the SEO specialist in an internal memo, said she displayed a dismissive attitude, lacked the qualifications to facilitate intercultural exchange, and failed to uphold even the basic tenets of diplomatic conduct. It was brutal, professional, but brutal. And I didn't feel triumphant. Not even vindicated. What I felt was colder. They didn't just lose a deal. They lost face. And in Japanese business culture, losing face isn't a PR problem. It's a permanent stain. Lexford reduced a relationship years in the making to a poorly translated PDF and a boardroom full of buzzwords. They dismissed my work, my insight, my presence, as if it were optional. As if trust could be automated. I looked out the window of my new office as Jenna's voice crackled in my earbuds. "The CFO is panicking," she said. "PR is drafting a holding statement. Sienna's vanished. No one's seen her since Friday." "Brandon?" "Radio silent. Rumor is the board's not happy." I said nothing. Because what could I say? They gambled their future on a shortcut and lost. Later that evening, I got another call. Unknown number again. I picked up this time. "Rachel Evans?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Jordan again, from Lexford Dynamics." I waited. "The executive team has authorized me to reach out with a new proposal," he said. "In light of recent events." I let the silence stretch. He rushed to fill it. "We understand the gravity of our mistake, and we'd like to reopen discussions. Should you be willing to consider re-engagement, this time not as a translator, but as a global strategy executive?" He paused. I didn't reply. So he added, with full creative authority, your own team, and compensation reflective of your value. I finally spoke. Interesting. He sounded relieved. Wonderful. If you have terms, we'd love to hear. I do. Silence. I want a formal apology again. Not from your legal team, from her, in person. And I want her to understand exactly why she was wrong. Not just for me, but for what she represents. Another pause, then quietly, understood. And financial compensation, I continued. Not as a favor, not as an incentive. As recognition of what you cost me, professionally and personally. More silence, then, we're prepared to discuss numbers. I'll think about it, I said. I hung up before he could say more. Because I wasn't waiting anymore, I wasn't hoping they'd see me. I knew who I was. And I didn't need their permission to feel whole again. That Friday, they got what they wanted, but not in the way they expected. I showed up one last time, not to return, but to witness the reckoning. When I stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, it felt like walking into a courtroom, stiff-backed suits, eyes trained forward, the air thick with polite dread. Sienna was already standing at the front of the room, visibly shaken but trying to maintain composure. She wore black too, but hers was for damage control, not clarity. Rachel, she began, before anything else, I owe you a very public apology. You could hear the tremble under her polish. The room went dead silent. I spoke out of turn, she said, voice strained. I undermined your work. I dismissed your expertise. I made disrespectful assumptions about your role and the value you brought to this company. I was arrogant and ignorant. And I understand now that what I did was not only unprofessional, it was harmful. She paused. My actions cost this company millions. But more than that, they damaged relationships, reputations, and trust. When she finished, she looked at me, eyes glossy, mouth set. And for a moment, I just looked back, calm, clear. Then I turned to the table, to Brandon, to the entire board. You saw me as a cost, I said, not an asset. You waited until the damage was done before realizing what I was worth. A few execs glanced down. Brandon didn't move. I was never asking for special treatment, I continued. I was asking for basic recognition. 17 years of insight, of diplomacy, of invisible labor that kept your business afloat in markets you didn't even bother to learn about. I turned slightly, sweeping the room with my voice. And now you want me to come back, to fix what you broke, to lend you credibility again. But I'm not your bandage. I'm not your safety net. Brandon finally spoke. We made a mistake, several clearly, but we are prepared to make it right, however that looks for you. I tilted my head. You can't fix this with an offer, or a press release, or a higher title. You want to make it right? Start by acknowledging that I was never the problem. The problem was the culture that allowed someone like me to be overlooked for so long. I let the words land. And just to be clear, I added, I'm not interested in coming back. Gasps would have been unprofessional, but I felt the tension crack like a hairline fracture suddenly splitting. Brandon's mouth tightened. May I ask where you've accepted, he said. I smiled, slow and soft. Cairo Tech. Dead silence. They called me, I said, the day after they pulled out, not because they needed a translator, but because they wanted someone who could lead global strategy with empathy and accuracy. Sienna looked like she'd swallowed glass. Brandon leaned back, defeat finally settling across his posture. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Later that night, standing on the balcony of my new office, I looked out over the city. The lights blinked like silent applause. The air carried that rare kind of quiet that feels earned. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission to feel accomplished. I was accomplished. I'd built something. My team was growing. We weren't just a consultancy. We were a revolution in the making. Cultural liaisons, translation experts, diplomatic consultants, most of them women, most of them underestimated in the exact same way I had been. At our first official team meeting, I told them, you're not here to fill a role. You're here to define it. Your voice matters, not just the language you speak, but the lens you bring. And I meant it. Because we weren't just building business. We were building trust. Sometimes people from Lexford still reach out. A few apologize. Some just want to know how we're doing it. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jenna asked me once. "Not for a second," I said, because they only saw my value when it was gone. She nodded. "And now?" "Now," I said, "they're trying to imitate something they never understood." We both laughed. Then I added, "And that's fine. They'll try, but they'll always be chasing what we're already becoming." It was a rainy morning the day the Lexford headlines finally hit the trades. The headline was restrained, as corporate shame often is. Global contract withdrawn amid translation error fallout. But I knew the truth behind every sterilized word. They didn't just lose Chirotech's account. They lost a continent's worth of trust. Because once word spread in the Japan-US business corridor that Lexford had mishandled high-stakes negotiation terms, everything else began to wobble. More than one client paused talks. A few suspended active collaborations, pending further review. And while Lexford scrambled to patch up the damage, my phone started ringing again. But this time, it wasn't panicked VPs or HR managers. It was people who remembered, people who'd worked with me over the years, partners, suppliers, liaisons, who suddenly had a reason to ask, "Hey Rachel, are you available?" I didn't say yes to everyone, but the offers came fast. Some from mid-size firms looking for cultural training, others from Fortune 500s, trying to fix internal policies they now realized were built on assumptions, not understanding. One particularly memorable call came from a former Lexford director who'd quietly left after Brandon took over. He said, "You were the canary, weren't you?" I smiled, more like the translator with a megaphone no one wanted to hear. We both laughed, but he was serious. "You warned them, they just didn't speak your language." And that was it, wasn't it? I didn't fail to communicate. They failed to listen. When the dust settled, Sienna resigned to pursue new opportunities. Brandon disappeared. Rumors swirled of a sabbatical or a consulting gig that sounded suspiciously like forced exile. Lexford issued an internal memo about rethinking global priorities, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, our firm, Bridge and Thread, took off. I didn't want a revenge arc. I didn't want poetic justice. What I wanted was what I finally had. Autonomy. Dignity. Legacy. We moved into a larger office that month. Nothing too flashy, but spacious, light-filled, and ours. Our onboarding packet started with a single statement. Language is more than words, it's perspective. We didn't hire people to check boxes. We hired them to open doors. And those early hires, some of the most brilliant people I'd ever met. One was a former museum guide, fluent in 4 languages and cultural protocol. Another had spent years as a literary translator and could deconstruct emotional nuance like a surgeon. We even took on interns, young women who'd been told their language degrees were too soft for real business. I made sure they heard the opposite on day 1. At our first team retreat, I stood in front of them and said, "We are not here to be backups to machines. We are not here to justify our roles with data points. We are here because humans will always crave connection, and connection needs context. That's what we provide." Someone cried. Someone else whispered, "Thank you." And I finally exhaled. Lexford never got that. They tried to replace meaning with metrics. They thought you could swap out a bridge builder for a plugin. But connection isn't a feature, it's a skill. It's earned, not programmed. And once it's broken, well, sometimes it's permanent. I remember the first time someone called me intangible. It was years before Lexford fell apart during a budget review. A senior manager looked at the sheet, squinted at the translation line item, and muttered, "Hard to quantify. Rachel's value is intangible." At the time, I let it slide. I thought, well, yeah, some things can't be measured with a spreadsheet. But now, sitting in my own office, surrounded by a team that understands the tangibility of what we do, I realize how much damage that word had done. It was an excuse. A way to sideline voices that didn't shout. A loophole for people who didn't want to make the effort to understand. They called it intangibility. What they meant was inconvenient to quantify. At Bridge and Thread, we flipped that notion on its head. Our very first internal report listed intangible assets on the first page. Relationships nurtured, crises avoided, trust preserved. We didn't hide the value of nuance behind buzzwords. We put it front and center. And guess what? Clients responded. Because people were tired of robotic service, tired of feeling like they were just another contract. One client, an Italian luxury goods brand, told us, "You helped us avoid insulting our own partners with a bad localization draft. No one else caught it. You did." We weren't just translating language. We were translating intention. That same month, I got a package. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Neat, controlled, and very, very Japanese. Inside was a letter. From Naoko Ishikawa. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Rachel-san, our silence was intentional, our departure deliberate. But our respect remains intact. May your voice reach further than any document ever could. With honor, Naoko Ishikawa. I read that line over and over. May your voice reach further than any document ever could. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a frame, and placed it beside my desk. It reminded me why I did this, why it mattered, why no matter how many AI tools or translation bots flooded the market, what we were doing would always have a place. Because context is still human, culture is still human, trust is still human. Later that evening, I got a message from Jenna. Just 2 words, "You won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like awakening. Because none of it would have happened if I hadn't been forced to walk away from Lexford. If they hadn't erased me with 2 lazy words, non-core. Their ignorance, my ignition. Their dismissal, my definition. And now, I no longer measure my days in performance reviews or quarterly summaries. I measure them in conversations, in breakthroughs, in the quiet, powerful nod of a partner who feels understood for the first time. I don't translate for a living. I build understanding. And in a world that's constantly automating, outsourcing, and simplifying what it doesn't want to learn, that makes me not intangible, but essential. The emails started slowly at first, a trickle of curiosity, polite check-ins from ex-colleagues, an occasional, "Hey, just saw the news," from old connections at Lexford. Then came the ones from people I didn't know, clients I'd never worked with directly, but who had heard about what happened. There was one from a senior advisor in Singapore. "I followed your journey. Your departure sent a signal to a lot of us. Thank you." Another from a former translator in Belgium who wrote, "You gave me the courage to finally leave a company that only valued my work when it was in crisis." Those messages didn't feel like fan mail. They felt like confirmation. Confirmation that I wasn't overreacting, that I hadn't made it all up in my head, that being dismissed, silenced, or labeled non-core was something that had happened to a lot of us. And now, because I'd told the story out loud, because I hadn't gone quietly, it was echoing in places I'd never imagined. I wasn't trying to start a movement, but somehow one had started anyway. It was during one of our team's weekly roundtables, soft music playing in the background, tea mugs on every desk, that one of our newer hires, a quiet woman named Diana, raised her hand and said, "I just want to thank you, Rachel. You don't know what it means to work in a space where we're not treated like tools." Everyone was quiet. And I felt it again, that breath, that warmth in my chest that said, "This is it. This is the reason." Because at Lexford, I was invisible until I wasn't. Here, we see each other every day. It wasn't just the major contracts or the growth numbers that kept me going. It was that finally, we had a workplace where fluency wasn't just about knowing words, but about recognizing worth. And we made sure our clients knew that too. We turned down deals if a company refused to invest in proper cultural onboarding. We didn't just slap translations onto their websites. We asked them who they wanted to be to their audience. We asked if they were ready to listen. One company, an American tech startup, wanted to launch in South Korea. Their CEO opened the kickoff call with, "We just need this stuff converted, nothing fancy." I smiled politely. Then I asked, "Are you looking to be understood or just heard?" There was a pause. He blinked. And then slowly he said, "I guess both?" That was our starting point. By the end of that contract, he told us we'd reshaped the way his team thought about communication. We weren't just delivering services. We were changing minds, changing cultures. And the ripple effect, it's real. One afternoon, about 6 months after I launched Bridge and Thread, Jenna came by the office. She looked around, bookshelves lined with linguistics texts, whiteboards filled with idioms and diagrams, a big plant in the corner someone had named Comma. "This place feels like you," she said. And it did. Because I had built it, not just from scratch, but from scars. Not out of revenge, but out of purpose. Before she left, she turned and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Lexford had actually appreciated you from the start?" I didn't even have to think. "No," I said, "because then I never would have left. And this," I gestured to the office, the team, the freedom. "This never would have existed." She nodded. Funny how loss gives us clarity. Loss, yes, but also release. I didn't need to carry Lexford anymore. I didn't need to hope they'd one day call again. I had already written the final word in that chapter. This was my epilogue. And it was just beginning. The final call came on a Thursday. A crisp afternoon, light streaming through my office windows. My calendar was full, strategy sessions, a mentorship hour, and a call with a new client from Oslo. But I still recognized the number instantly. Lexford Dynamics. I didn't let it go to voicemail this time. "Rachel Evans speaking," I said. There was a pause, then a voice I didn't recognize, calm, careful. "Ms. Evans, this is Susan Langford, interim CEO at Lexford. I wanted to personally acknowledge what you contributed to this company and what we failed to see." Another pause. "We've read the exit interviews, the post-mortem from the Chirotech deal, and frankly, we've realized too late what your presence meant to our culture." I stayed silent. She continued, "I don't expect a reply, but I did want you to know we're not reaching out to offer anything, just to say thank you and that we're sorry." And for the first time in all this, I believed it. Not the performative kind of apology, not the damage control version. A real one. I didn't cry, I didn't clench my fists, I just nodded. Because I'd already made peace. After we hung up, I walked into our shared workspace and saw the team gathered around a long table, laughing gently over someone's accidental typo, public relations, had auto-corrected to pudding relations. They were brilliant, thoughtful, kind. They were building something with me, not for me. This was the reward. That night, I stood in the kitchen, cooking dinner slowly, music playing, when a message popped up on my phone from Jenna. "Saw the new website. Your story's in the About Us. You okay with that?" I smiled. "More than okay," I typed back. Because it wasn't just my story anymore. It was a signal to anyone who's ever been told they're too invisible, too soft-spoken, too non-core. It was a reminder that being underestimated doesn't mean being unworthy. And it was proof that no matter how corporate structures try to erase you, your voice can still rise, reshape, and reclaim space. To Brandon Wolfe, if you're still out there, I hope you've learned that trust isn't a checkbox. It's a language. To Sienna Hart, I hope you found humility somewhere, and a dictionary. To every team I've worked with since, thank you for reminding me what leadership looks like when it's built on listening. And to you, watching this now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed? Overlooked? Told your work didn't matter until the moment it did? How did you handle it? What was the outcome? Drop your story in the comments. Let's make this space not just a platform, but a place of recognition. If this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. And to you, wherever you are in your journey, I hope you speak with clarity, walk with dignity, and never again wait for someone else to see your worth. You already know it. Be the voice,